Thank you so much, everyone who is joining us for this series. Do you know what? I'm having so much fun going through the movies. We started with section 31 and then jumped all the way back to the motion picture. We've done The Wrath of Khan, we did The Search for Spock, and of course, this time, it's one I've really been looking forward to. So much so that this is one of those ones I want to share with my friends. So it won't just be me this week doing the ups and downs for Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. After all, it is the one with the whales. That is right, George and Gracie are going to join me here for the ups and downs. It was the lightness that we needed after the very heavy Wrath of Khan and the not as heavy but not exactly a chin tickler Search for Spock. Or is it stomach tickler? I can never remember what that phrase is. Whereas this time we really come out the gate with a bit of smiling going on, and it needed it. You know, the tone of this film is one that is absolutely timeless. The message of this film is, I think, even more prescient today. We need to look after our planet. Of course, there's a very large Greenpeace and environmentalism message behind this film. After all, it's about saving whales from extinction, you know? People have kind of missed that little bit throughout the years. No, this is about looking after our planet. I mean, come on. You don't want George and Gracie to get hurt, do you? Look at them. All right, the first up of this video is going to the dedication for the Challenger. That's right at the very beginning. On the 28th of January 1986, which was roughly about 10 months before the film released, the shuttle Challenger exploded just after launch. Now, this was one of those country-stopping disasters that was as horrific as it was live. A lot of children were watching the Challenger take off, and therefore a lot of children watched it explode. This film being what it was, being sci-fi, being Star Trek, being about striving toward a better future by looking at our present, I think the inclusion of this dedication was a classy move on the part of director Leonard Nimoy. The second up of the film goes to Leonard Rosenman. Now, we have a new composer joining the film series. So we had Jerry Goldsmith for the motion picture, and then James Horner, who looked after The Wrath of Khan and The Search for Spock. Leonard Rosenman, who was in fact a friend of Leonard Nimoy, joined at the director's request. And you know what? He brought a unique, different style to the music that, of course, suits the lighter tone. But more than that, it stands out. Like, I can immediately recognize the music from The Voyage Home over so much of the rest of the music of Star Trek. It's very, I think I've said unique already. I'm going to say it again. It's very, very unique. It's also, it's away from that, the lush space opera of the motion picture and the naval-inspired music of the second and third films. Plus, it's got, you know, Hospital Chase and Chekhov's Run and that opening credit. Look, I'm not going to lie. This score's a banger. The film opens with the arrival of the Cetacean probe, and the USS Saratoga is the first ship to encounter it, or the first that we see on screen. Saratoga, of course, being a repaint of the USS Reliant model, or what was left of it after the explosion. But the up here I'm giving to Madge Sinclair, who is the first on-screen female captain of a Starfleet starship. This is a big moment for Star Trek. Of course, now we've since gone on to see Rachel Garrett, we've had Captain Janeway, we've had Captain Burnham, we've had Captain Georgiou. You know, we've had a lot of female captains. Not to forget Captain Battelle from Strange New Worlds as well. Look, there's a lot of female captains now. In 1986, this was a big deal, and the fact that she was a person of color was just as important. I would be completely remiss not to give her an up there, especially because she went on to be the mother of Geordi LaForge. Different character, but that doesn't really matter right now. This establishes the scale of the Cetacean probe, but back on Earth, they've got other things to deal with because they're looking at the footage that is just straight up reused footage from Star Trek: The Search for Spock, and I gotta be honest, giving it a down. How on earth did they get that footage? They do, when you're showing the interior, they do make it look like it's from the black box, right? We then just get straight up scenes of the Enterprise self-destructing and going toward the Genesis planet. And yes, okay, you could argue that the Bird of Prey did capture this footage because there is included a message from Admiral Kirk as well, but listen, it's a bit noticeable, isn't it? One thing that's also noticeable, but for all the right reasons, is John Shook taken up, playing the Klingon ambassador. He is such a standout in this film, with arguably very little to do. He would of course return in Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, but the way that he delivers his lines, and also quite frankly, the argument he has with Mark Lenard's Sarek is, yeah, you know, he's compelling. I don't agree with his stance. In fact, taken up Sarek, Mark Lenard, for his delivery of "they have the right to commit murder." You know, it's a good scene. Sometimes you can have these argument scenes between politicians and between, you know, dignitaries giving out to each other and butting heads, and it can be dull. That is not true of the voyage home. It sets up the fact that the Klingon Empire blames Kirk for the theft of the Klingon ship, which is, you know, fair, and the death of the Klingon crew. It was a battle, so, you know, I don't know if that's entirely fair. But the Klingons and Kirk once again being established as effectively mortal enemies. We don't really go into the depths of that in this film, but oh boy howdy will we revisit it in a couple of weeks. Speaking of the theft of a Klingon ship, taken up HMS Bounty. So the HMS Bounty, a little side story for me, was that I used to collect the Star Trek Micro Machines, and the HMS Bounty was released as a Micro Machine with the posable wings, and they had a tiny little HMS Bounty on the side of it. And I'm gonna say I was like 8 or 9 when I started getting the Micro Machines, and I was 18 when I got the HMS Bounty, because it's a bloody hard one to find, and that was when I discovered eBay, and that's when the credit card companies started to come for me. But yeah, finally got it, because it's a gorgeous ship and I wanted to have it. And I love the, you know, historical joke, Mutiny on the Bounty. I love it. But it's also just a gorgeous, gorgeous scene. That image of the landed Klingon ship on the surface of Vulcan. Love the interaction between Kirk and the crew. They've all elected to go back and face the music. Well, most of them have elected to go, well, okay, no, all of the ones who would have to face the music have elected to go back and face the music. I think that's the fairest way of putting it. We then get, of course, my old stomping grounds, taken up for the Vasquez Rocks. I know technically it's like, Sean, really, you're giving an up to a location? Yeah. Anyway, Spock continues on with his sort of re-education. His Katra has been bonded back with his body, but you know, there's a few steps left to go to really become the Spock that he was before. We get that great scene where he's doing all of the tests at once, which culminates in, how do you feel? How do you feel? How do you feel? And you know, that phraseology, that, you know, statement of that has been burned into my memory since I first saw this film. And as fun as that is, my up for the scene must go to Jane Wyatt. Reprising the role of Amanda Grayson that she originated in Journey to Babel, Jane Wyatt makes her final appearance as Spock's mother here in this scene. She sets up, of course, something that becomes much more a bigger thing at the end of the film, if you will. It's really sweet, it's really nice, and I'm really glad they chose to include this in the film. Obviously, Nimoy directed this film. I don't know if he was the one who said we must include her, or if it just became a natural part of the scripting process. But having Amanda in this scene is just that little reminder that behind all of the logic, there is still at least a half-human heart. The cetacean probe is starting to show its effects. The Saratoga has been shut down, as have several other ships, as sadly, so does Space Dock. We get that great shot of Space Dock effectively turning off all of the lights. Inside Space Dock, we see the Excelsior still bearing the NX-2000 registry. Not important for this film, I just like it. There's also a Miranda-class ship in Space Dock as well. We get the introduction of that little Space Dock shuttle too, which I really, really like. That's of course down on the surface, down in San Francisco as well. But as I sort of fly through that, what we get is the introduction of Admiral Cartwright. Brock Peters, you taken up, sir. He was fantastic in everything he ever did. Of course, we might know him best as Joseph Sisko, but this was his first appearance in Star Trek. Admiral Cartwright would of course return in Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, which I'll talk more about when we get to that. But here in this light film, he gets some fairly heavy moments. You know, he is there looking after all of Starfleet while Earth is being switched off by the probe. We get that scene then in Starfleet headquarters of them scrambling and trying to keep the power on, and the oceans start being vaporized. Have a word, will yous? But yes, Brock Peters, always an up from me. Trying to figure out what's happening, they contact the Yorktown. I'm going to give this a down. And the down is the implication, and I'm putting this one directly at Gene Roddenberry's feet, because he said the Enterprise A, spoiler, is a rechristened USS Yorktown. But somewhere along the way, the story became that the Yorktown did lose all power, and Captain Joel Randolph didn't manage to keep the power going with his solar sail. So actually it was a coffin ship, which makes the legacy of the Enterprise A just a little bit dark. Nice to include the name Yorktown, I guess. Cutting back to Vulcan, the HMS Bounty is just about ready to take off, and then we get what is my next down of the film, and it's how Saavik is basically told, thanks, bye. Scripted, but not included in the film, was the revelation that Saavik stayed behind on Vulcan because she was pregnant with Spock's child. I will discuss that a little bit more when we come to temporal observations, but in the film as presented, all we got was Saavik going, bye. Well, she does take a second, of course, to tell Kirk how brave David was when he died. And it is the one mention we get of David Marcus in this film, which I do like that. I just love Saavik as a character, and to have her so, I guess, unceremoniously written out like this just feels like a bit of a disservice. It's also, sadly, the very last time, for a very long time, that we would see Robin Curtis as Saavik, or in general. Robin would return in the next generation, but Saavik wouldn't return for 30 odd years after this, nearly 40 years after this. So to have this be the last scene is a down from me. With Space Dock in orbit over the Earth, Sarek is the one to then advise the president on what to do next. He advises a message that has become immortalized in Star Trek history, which is to warn people to stay away from Earth. I'll come back to that in a moment, but it's just a great scene between Mark Lenard, Robert Ellenstein, and Brock Peters here. Yeah, there's so many great just side characters in this film. The Bounty is warping its way toward Earth, and before it starts to pick up distress signals, Spock and McCoy have a little talk. Well, I should say McCoy tries to have a little talk with Spock, because think about it, they're pretty close now. They've been friends for years. Okay, friends might be a loose interpretation of the word, but they've been close colleagues for years, and now McCoy has shared his body with Spock's mind. So he sits down to see if he can get a little bit of a talk about, as he describes it, where no man has gone before, but Spock replies with, it would be impossible to discuss without a common frame of reference. And as McCoy says, you're saying I have to die to talk about death? And we get this great moment as well where McCoy says, you know, happy you're back. You know, I could fill your seat, but I wouldn't want to fill your shoes. My shoes, Doctor. Just Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley, just fun together, and showing that grumpy McCoy that we all know and love, and sort of the Spock that we all know and love. Still a little rusty, you know, still not quite where he had gotten to by Wrath of Khan, but give him time. He distracts McCoy by saying he is picking up many distress signals. We go over to Uhura, who says she's getting a distress signal from Earth itself. And we get that great warning delivered by Federation President, played by Robert Ellenstein, I just like the name, that tells people to avoid the planet Earth at all costs. I've always enjoyed this warning, the way it's delivered, the way it comes across, the way it sets the stakes, and also the way it was honored an awful lot later in Star Trek. The scene is set. What are we gonna do? I know what we'll do. Well, we listen to a message. Spock is the one to figure out that with the message being directed at Earth's oceans, it should be listened to as if one were underwater. Uhura, because she is a genius, manages to make it sound like that. Spock goes, fascinating, and away he goes off to the little antechamber away from the very redesigned looking Klingon bridge, I should add. And that is where he figures out that, yes, one of my friends here, the message is targeted at humpback whales. Now there's a little bit of discussion over this where, you know, McCoy is trying to figure out who the message is for, and Spock delivers the immortal, only human arrogance would presume the message must be meant for man. Taken up. This movie is not subtle. I will say that. For all of the, I guess, critiques about Star Trek in recent years being as subtle as a brick to the face, Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home is as subtle as a ton of bricks to all of our faces. This is about what we did to the planet back then. And I love it. Kirk figures that the way to get to extinct animals is quite simple. Fly back in time. And it's in fact McCoy who says, sure, slingshot around the sun, pick up enough speed, you're in time warp. Don't, and you're toast. I love how just matter of fact it is. Because they did it before, and, you know, people will do it again afterwards. It's kind of the silliness I love about Star Trek. It's like, we're going to travel through time. Yeah, okay, it's Tuesday. Do you know, back on Earth, we get a couple of quick cameos. Taken Up. Majel Barrett returning as Christine Chapel for the first time since Star Trek The Motion Picture, and Taken Up. Grace Lee Whitney returning as Commander Rand. Is she a lieutenant in this film? She might be a lieutenant in this film. But yes, we get 2 original series cast members here. I'll discuss them a little bit later on in the episode because their appearance is more important than you might initially think. But we get a sort of a blink and you miss it cameo. Chapel is trying to get the power switched on for all the medical. Rand is trying to make sure communications stay online. But yeah, great to see them. Kirk, McCoy and Spock, without a word of context I might add, ask if Scotty can transform the cargo bay to hold a lot of water and a couple of humpbacks. Humpback people, sir? Up! Whales, Scotty, whales! Oh, this film, it's starting to get toward the outright comedy, okay? But before they can do that, they send a message to Earth. Now, back down at Starfleet headquarters, they get this message from Kirk, who says they're going to go back in time, try and get 2 humpback whales. They're going to attempt time warp at this time. Taken Up. I didn't think that a distorted message could leave such an impression as it does, but I don't know why. I just really liked that moment. And then, of course, you get Brock Peters, get him back, and the window breaks, and then we cut. Because we can't see any more of that scene yet, at least not for a while. The bird of prey warps toward the sun, and honestly, can someone explain the idea of speed to me? This scene gets a pass for me because it's not established that the bird of prey is near Earth, because, well, if it was, it would be powered down by the cetacean probe. But, like, the bird of prey gets up over warp 8, and it still takes a few moments and a few seconds to reach our sun? Like, where are they flying from? Because if they're inside our solar system, you would think that they would get there a bit faster, but that wouldn't be dramatic, now would it? And Sulu wouldn't get to do warp 8, warp 8.1, 8.2. I'm so sorry to George Takei for that impression there. But yeah, but then we get time warp. And look, down, what were they taking when they designed the time warp scene? I know this is going to be a controversial one. I can hear the comments already. Was there a little bit of LDS being taken? Because this is trippy as. What is cool is those heads are actually styrofoam. Look, yeah, there's a bit of CGI obviously added around it, but they did build those heads from molds of the series cast, which was a bit cool. But then you get like, the whale thing, and then there's a body falling down, and then you're looking at a lake for some reason, and it's all a bit like, aha. We're gonna cut to Kirk asleep in his chair. Everyone's okay, that's fine. They figure out where they are. They're on orbit of Earth in the late 20th century. It's 1986, by the way. Spock having the wherewithal to be like, we're probably visible to the scanning devices at the time, and remembering to cloak. Taken Up. In that scene as well, we set some more stakes because Scotty goes, whoops, the dilithium crystals are burned out. You know, we can't recrystallize them, not even in the 23rd century. You know, it's like, oh, that's a problem. Some stakes, you say? I'll take it. What they need to do is factor in on some whales. They do factor in on some whale song, and it happens to be coming from San Francisco. Taken Up. To my horror, I have yet to visit San Francisco, considering how much I love this film and Star Trek in general. Closest I've been is I've flown through the airport. There you are now. Yeah, I really want to see San Francisco, and I want to go across the bay to Alameda, and I want to go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. I want to do all of these things, but I have not yet. But it's getting it up for me because it's just gorge. The assignments are being handed out to each of the crew. McCoy is going to be part of the team that puts together the whale tank. Oh, joy. Oh, only DeForest Kelley can pronounce a word with such disdain, lack of hope, and cynicism, and still make us love him. They also then realize that in the late 20th century, you know, it was a foregone conclusion that none of these humans had ever seen an alien being before. So Spock rips a long strip from his robe and covers his eyebrows and ears. Perhaps he took direction from Carl Douglas's 1974 hit Kung Fu Fighting. I don't really know. All I know is that this image has kind of gone down as one of the funniest images in Star Trek history. Taken Up. Everything about the landing scene gets an up from me. The fact that they go down in Golden Gate Park, the fact that those two bin men get caught up in the downstream, the fact that she wants a damn toaster oven, just the laughter starts here and doesn't really stop for me. Oh my God, did you see that? No, and neither did you, so shut up. Love it. I love this scene. Like, there's so many contenders for Latinum up for this film. This was close. Good God. We then get the very UFO-esque, kind of something arrives from the middle of the air, the light is behind it, they drive off. Really, it's just our crew walking down the landing tunnel. Landing tunnel? Landing strut. What is the word I'm looking for? When we get the immortal. Everyone remember where we parked. True story, my dad has said that every time he's parked a car with me since this film was released. Every time. Well, since I've been alive anyway. So, yeah, that's an up. That's a part of Ferric history right there. The music subtly changes. And we're here. We're in the mid-1980s in San Francisco, and we get the beginnings of some colorful metaphors. Up! Well, double dumbass on you! And even, if you look closely, do you see Sulu? It's a bit like, he does that thing where he's kind of like, he points and follows the car along. I'm more afraid of him than I am of anyone else in this film, because if he wants to, I reckon he can mess you up. Remember that tall security guard from Star Trek 3? Sulu does. They then realize very quickly that this is a cash-based economy, so they're going to need to get some money. So Kirk and Spock go to an antique store, where Kirk has the wherewithal to think, hold on, I have an antique on me. It's the glasses that McCoy gave him for his birthday back in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. He gets them appraised, and, they're worth about $100. He goes, is that a lot? And to which the appraiser goes, it's enough. And you get this moment of, forgive me, Admiral, but weren't those a birthday present from Dr. McCoy? And they will be again, that's the beauty of it. Up. Now, they dispense the money, everyone is sent on their various tasks, and Kirk and Spock need to find the whales. Spock decides he will make use of this map that is here, and then a bus pulls up. I think what we'll find at the Cetacean Institute in Sausalito, a pair of humpback whales named George and Gracie. Admiral, how could you possibly know this? Simple logic. They then board the bus. What does it mean? Exact change only. Up. Oh my God, up. Just up. That entire exchange. Yes, it isn't up. Yes, it is. Sulu, McCoy, and Scotty, who are in charge of building the whale tank, walk by the Pacific Bell Yellow Pages. Right, taken up, but this is something that, of course the whole film is dated, but this really dates the film because, yeah, this is something that sort of becomes less and less timely as time goes on. Did you know, in fact, that, the phone you are possibly watching this on while sitting on the toilet, phones used to be attached to the wall and used to have a cord coming out of them, so you couldn't just take them away with you. And a lot of times you wouldn't be able to save your number into telephones. You would have to use a book. Well, the Yellow Pages was a book that had all of the numbers of businesses and the like, and yeah, I remember having a few of them as I was growing up, and they certainly were all the rage. Chekhov and Uhura, they're in charge of finding a way to recrystallize the dilithium crystals, the Klingon ones. To do that, they need nuclear power. Of course, nuclear power was being used a lot in the American military and their ships at the time. Is the message sinking in yet? Sorry, subtlety. And then we get the immortal scene of Chekhov and Uhura stopping random passers-by and a cop looking for the nuclear vessels. We're looking for the naval base in Alameda. Nuclear vessels. Up. Latinum up. Nuclear vessels is my Latinum up of the film. Are you kidding me? This is where the film stops taking any attempt at taking itself seriously. And I'm so here for it. Just so here for it. In fact, the passerby that stops and speaks to them, stick around for temporal observations because that's a funny story in itself. On their way to the Cetacean Institute, Kirk and Spock finally manage to board a bus and we get, of course, Kirk Thatcher taken up, will ya? The punk on the bus is just one of those stupidly, sillily, brilliantly scenes in Star Trek. He wrote the music, he was working on the film already, he was so much fun. And just the film is better with the scene than without it. Spock giving him the Vulcan nerve pinch. He, falls forward and turns the boombox off. They get a round of applause. I mean, what do you want me to say about this? It's just gas. The next up is the Cetacean Institute itself. This was, of course, played by the real-life Monterey Bay Aquarium. And quite frankly, they didn't change much. They changed the logo on the outside, sure, but otherwise the building is pretty identical. The only thing I recently discovered, which makes me a bit sad, is they don't have a plaque commemorating Star Trek 4, which I really thought they would. But anyway, we'll remember them. But yeah, that is an up from me because it looks like a gorgeous place to visit. I'll get there eventually. But Gillian Taylor, Catherine Hicks, will you take an up from me? She's brilliant. She's the smart, sort of out of time person, but dealing with people from another time, I should say, character in this film that it needs. The balance is great. She has such great chemistry with William Shatner. Everything works. In fact, if I'd one regret, it's that we don't see her again after this film. Oh, she lives. Spoiler, no spoiler. I'm presuming you've seen the film if you're watching this. She's very much alive at the end of this film, so it is a shame we didn't see her again, but, as a contained story, brilliant. She holds people to task. She doesn't take any crap from anyone. She is not, there's no kind of like, oh my God, you're spacemen from the future. There's no kind of, when she sees Spock, unmasked, there's no, an alien, ooh. Sorry, because that's probably how I would react if I saw an alien. I'd like to think that I wouldn't, but sure, you never know. And when she's talking about the plight of the whales, she sells it. Now, I don't know if Catherine Hicks herself was as passionate about whales as Gillian Taylor is, but to say that I believed her in this role, love it. For example, the way she delivers, whoever said the human race was logical. It seems like such a rebuke, but also an agreement with the lack of common sense that humanity has, without being hopeless either. She speaks with great care about George and Gracie and about what they can do as an institute to help whales. And again, not for me to belabor the point, but this is one of the clever things about this film, that it includes footage of whaling. It sort of snuck its way into audiences who may not have been expecting this and delivers its message quite on the nose, but in such a way that I think really, really works. But of course, all of that wouldn't have worked if Gillian Taylor didn't work as a character, and she absolutely does. An alien, ooh. She brings them down to the underground, well, not the underground, she brings them underground to see through the water tanks. And, Kirk is standing there, and Gillian is talking about whale song. We're hearing recorded whale song, and Kirk's looking for Spock, because Spock's decided to go for a little swim. William Shatner sells the heck out of this whole scene, and just the way that lady delivers, maybe he's singing to that man. Up. We turn around and see Leonard Nimoy going for a swim there. It's so funny. It's so fun. And also, it's very thematic, It's both funny and yeah, it's exactly what Spock would do. So Gillian and Kirk run upstairs and, she greets him with, what the hell? Or she says, what the hell? I want to know why you've been messing with my whales. And Kirk goes, yeah, speak up. And Spock's like, anyway, Admiral, if we assumed that we could do whatever we please with those whales, we would be just as guilty as those who caused their extinction. I know I've probably misphrased that a little bit, but it's succinct, it's to the point, and it's enough to burn into Gillian's memory. She figures out that they're a couple of kooks, and she has them thrown out of the aquarium. But they're not too upset by this, because they now know there's a male and female whale in captivity in an enclosed space that they can just beam up together. Not only that, but Gillian explained that they're due to be released into the wild. It all works. It all works well. We get the introduction of Bob. I'll discuss Bob in a moment. As Kirk and Spock are walking along with that glorious shot of the Golden Gate Bridge behind them, that's an up from me. Chekhov and Uhura signal because they have found the ship from which the nuclear power is emanating. And Admiral, it is the Enterprise. I mean, it wasn't the Enterprise, but that's fine. That's fine. It's just lovely. It's fun. We also spend more time on this Enterprise than we do on any other. I'll get to it. Guess who drives by? Sure, it's only Gillian driving in her truck alongside Robin Hood and Friar Tuck. She offers to give them a lift, but warns them she's got a tire iron right where she can get at it. And they have the infamous scene where, you know, Spock did a little bit he was in Berkeley in the 60s. He did a little too much LDS. Taken up. Apparently, there was a part of the in the novel, sorry, there is a moment where Gillian goes, "Are you dyslexic?" You didn't need the joke. The joke lands enough as it is. Gillian displays her eidetic memory by repeating Spock's words back to him verbatim. Better than I did, I should say. And Spock asks Kirk, "Admiral, would it be now time for a colourful metaphor?" And then he drops a little bombshell. Gracie is pregnant. Nearly slams into the front of the car as Gillian slams on the brakes. Because how could Spock possibly know that? And, well, we know how Spock would know that from a certain Vulcan procedure that he did with Gracie. But suffice to say here, she invites them to dinner. Do you like Italian? Yes, no. Yes, no. Yes. I love Italian. And so do you. Yes. Up. Returning now to Sulu, McCoy and Scotty, we get Dr. Nichols. I like Dr. Nichols. Dr. Nichols is fun. Dr. Nichols quit smoking. Good for him. McCoy and Scotty are posing as a renowned pair of scientists and assistant who have travelled over from Scotland, Professor Scott, with his assistant McCoy. Don't bury yourself in the part. Love it. And they get a tour of the Plexicorp Corporation. They're going to get their glass for the whale tank. Meanwhile, Sulu is introducing himself to a Huey pilot. I am told a Huey is a type of helicopter. Nah, I'm kidding. And yeah, I love this. Just the little jokes like, you know, oh, something like this must be old hat to you. Oh, little bit. But I love the classics. Say, can I ask you a few questions? I love small scene sets up a good gag later on. Dr. Nichols, after giving them his tour, they go into his office and he says, "Now, what is it I can do for you, gentlemen?" And Professor Scott says, "Actually, I think there's something we might be able to do for you." They ask him about the dimensions that would be required to hold the requisite amount of water for 2 whales. No, I can't remember it, I'm sorry. And he was able to, you know, rattle it off really quickly. And crucially, they carry that in stock. So Scott, to pay for this, goes, "What if I was able to give you something that would be able to do the same job will be just 1 inch thick?" Star Trek IV's novelization by Vonda N. McIntyre goes into a bit more detail about the flagrant ignoring of whatever the 23rd century equivalent of the Temporal Prime Directive was. Because, I mean, Scotty, there's walking a line of breaking, you know, temporal laws, and there's what you're doing here. Now, the novel confirms that Nichols was the one to invent transparent aluminum, which I'm pronouncing that way because that's how it's said in the film, aluminium. Anyway, that's what the novel says. In the film, he's just, how do we know he didn't invent the thing? Okay, Scotty, but like the law. Anyway, predestination paradox is just one of the suggestions for how Nichols gets transparent aluminum technology, but they get what they need from it, and poor Madeline. Not now, Madeline! With their whale tanks secure, Kirk and Gillian go to dinner. Spock decides to just hang out at Golden Gate Park. Not dodgy at all. But they go and sit down, and Gillian asks, "Do you trust me?" Kirk says, "Implicitly." And so she orders 2 pizzas for them and 2 beers as well. Fair play. Sounds like a good order, I'm not gonna lie to you. Over this dinner, we get some more things that date this film. You've got a pocket pager. Kirk comes clean about who and where he is from, who he is and where he's from. But she goes first, like, "Don't tell me, you're from outer space." "No, I'm from Iowa, I'm just working outer space." Taken up. I mean, it's one of the immortal lines, isn't it? And for the rest of this scene, we get plays on the fact that she starts to see that there's a slightly bigger picture going on. He is honest with her. Of course she doesn't believe him initially because, "Hi, I'm from out of time. Be my friend." Who hasn't tried that one? Am I right? Am I right? Am I right? Who hasn't? While this is happening, Chekhov and Uhura are beamed into the Enterprise. I want to give an up to pretty much all the scenes on the Enterprise, bar one. but yeah. Because, in fairness, this was the USS Ranger CV-61. Like, this is a real ship, and they allowed filming for this. It's also, do my research for this, they were never going to get permission to film inside of the actual Enterprise. Well, one, because the dates didn't work out, it was out at sea, but also it was like super classified. You weren't going to be putting, oh, here's what it looks like inside a nuclear destroyer. Possibly the wrong word, I apologize. But yeah, that was never going to happen. So thank you to the Ranger for becoming the Enterprise for this film. We then get, great fun. Unfortunately, because of the power drain, Scotty's only able to beam them out one at a time. Uhura goes first with the nuclear power. This has tripped some alarms. The Enterprise crew find Chekhov. 1986, a Russian man in a classified location in American military. Another thing that's dated this film so much, because now that would just be normal. I do have it down as well for the immediately following scene where Chekhov is being interrogated. For the love of God, man, would you not leave your Starfleet ID back on the ship? Ah, now, Pavel. Hi, here's my ID, here's my blood type, and a list of my fears. I hope you enjoy this, person from 3 centuries ago. Some of the language in this scene has not aged very well. 1986, we've learned. We know better. We don't use this kind of language anymore. So, yeah, discussing Chekhov's perceived mental state. When they turn their back on Chekhov, he picks up one of the Klingon phasers that they brought from the Bird of Prey and threatens them all. Now, the nuclear power seems to have, broken the Klingon phaser, which he then throws at them, leaving it behind. Down. Does the temporal prime directive, within a certain space of hours, they have shattered any kind of hope of not affecting the past, haven't they? Like, who briefed these people? Well, Kirk, I suppose. It is fun to see an awful lot of the Ranger crew actually make cameos in this scene, and the scene where Chekhov goes running through the ship. Chekhov gets a lot farther than I thought he was going to, and the next thing, splat. That looks like a much higher height than it's sort of presented. I'm not going to down the fact that he doesn't die because it's Chekhov, but I don't see him surviving that. We'll have to leave Chekhov though for a moment, because the greatest villain in all of cinematic history rears his ugly head here. Gillian arrives at the Cetacean Institute in the morning to find the tanks empty, George and Gracie are gone, and Bob stops her to say, oh, he didn't want a media circus, he thought it would be too hard. He didn't even let her say goodbye. She wallops him. Gillian realizes that she has basically one hope to ever see George and Gracie again. So she drives her truck to Golden Gate Park, and as she pulls in, she sees yet another, just example of the original series crew taking a wee on the temporal prime directive. I know it wasn't written yet. Because in the middle of the morning, it's as clear as day, Sulu has flown a little model Huey helicopter across. I love how they did that. But then they're lowering the glass into the Bird of Prey for all to see. Lads. Anyway, Gillian starts running toward the Bird of Prey and has that moment where she goes bump against presumably the foot of the Bird of Prey. It's silly. It's done. I probably would have smashed my nose on that thing, but that's an up. Because it's just funny in the way it's like, Admiral Kirk! Admiral Kirk! Love it. As she's beamed on board the Bird of Prey, and Kirk says, Alice, welcome to Wonderland. This is where she sees Spock in his Vulcan glory. She's like, hell yeah. She's taking it very well. This is when it reveals the crucial information that George and Gracie ain't there anymore. They could be in the middle of the sea at this point. So we got a bit of a problem because we got to get to the end. But as Admiral Kirk says, we're a ship with a missing man because Chekhov is in Mercy Hospital. They're able to find him because 23rd century tech, why not? And, as Uhura says, Uhura is there beating herself up because she's like, I should never have left him. He's not expected to survive. Well, yeah, if you leave him at the mercy of 20th century doctors, he's definitely not going to survive. No shade, by the way, on 20th century doctors. They were doing what they could at the time. We then get the hospital scene. Right. So you get Kirk, Gillian, and McCoy are trying to sneak into Chekhov's room. Before that, McCoy sees a woman in the corridor. What's the matter with you? Dialysis. What is this, the Dark Ages? You take that, and if you have any problems, you come see me. Okay. And then they're trying to get into the secure wing, but they can't until Gillian starts to moo, and McCoy rattles off a long, complicated set of symptoms. Says she has cramps. They get into the room where the doctors there about to drill a hole in Chekhov's head, and the doctors are, a bit understandably like, who the hell are these people? Yeah, they encourage them into a closet where Kirk melts the lock shut with a Klingon phaser. Nice to see the Klingon little Type 1 phaser, I guess. Nice to see a working phaser, not gonna lie to you. Give it a few seconds and Chekhov is blinking and he's around. Kirk goes, Chekhov, name, rank. Chekhov, Pavel, rank, Admiral. He's fine. So they start wheeling him out and the guards say, how is he? Oh, he's gonna make a great recovery. You came in with a she. And then we get the hospital chase. If you're wondering why I'm discussing this with such detail, I have loved this scene forever. And the thing that really tops it, that really makes it amazing, the doctor gave me a pill and I now need a new kidney. The doctor gave me a pill and I grew a new kidney. Not only is this scene an up, but it's a two-whale dilithium up. The hospital chase, everything about it, the music, the pacing, the running, all of it into the elevator, beaming up, stunning. I just love this scene. We're back on board the Bird of Prey and Gillian's told to get off. We're just outside the Bird of Prey. And Gillian is told, well, you're not coming with us. And Kirk's like, the next stop is the 23rd century, which she said, there's no one for me here. I need to go. And he's like, this Oz. Long story medium, she jumps onto him as he's beaming away. And he knows when he's beat. You're coming with us, Gillian, which I think is brilliant. History be damned. Gillian's on her way to the 23rd century, but there's going to be a stop first in the middle of the ocean. As they're getting ready to head toward George and Gracie, Kirk goes, oh, Spock, have you accounted for the differential of the water and whales with the time warp? And Spock, he said, I will have to make a guess. A guess? Spock, I'm shocked. I am not sure what the Admiral means. I'm paraphrasing wildly. And as McCoy says, I think he feels a lot safer about your guesses than most other people's facts. And we're getting back to the Kirk, McCoy and Spock of days gone by, taken up. The scene that follows is one of my just favorite images from Star Trek as well. In fact, there may be an image on screen right now showing just how much I like this scene. The whaler, the countdown, zooming over them, and the Bird of Prey decloaking over that whaler. Take an up. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. If you're engaged in whaling, screw you. So everything about this is so much fun, and just what an iconic image. They beam up the whales, and we get the immortal delivery of Admiral, there be whales here. Whatever about going to warp inside a solar system, what are you doing going to warp inside a planetary atmosphere? The whole point of this film was about preservation. Anyway, spoiler alert, the time warp works. They get back to the 23rd century and they arrive just in time to meet the whale probe, which would be good news only for the fact that it turns everything off and they head down toward San Francisco. I will say, wasn't it wonderfully lucky that of all of the places they could have targeted and crash landed, it was just underneath the bridge in San Francisco Bay? Does it make logical sense? No. Do I care? Not even in the slightest. Because taken up that shot of the Bird of Prey appearing out of the clouds flying underneath the bridge, and even you've got Sarek going, look! And Cartwright going, they're headed for the bridge! Love it. I've no issue with any of this scene. The crash landing itself is done really well. It was done in that whopper tank that is also a car park at Paramount Lot. You get the slowly sinking Bird of Prey, they blow the hatch, everyone goes out onto it, there's a lot of water. It's a good time. And it leads then to the climax of this film that could almost only have worked in this film, right? You get the whales, okay? I've brought a demonstration for the class. You get the whales and you have George, because it's the males that sing, who does this. I'm trying to make sure they're both in the shot. He goes vertical, right? And he starts to tell the whale probe just what to go do with itself. None of it's translated because, it doesn't need to be. It's whale song. And away the probe goes. And I love it. It's so Star Trek. It's so like all of this action adventure, everything, although it's technically the crew of the Enterprise with a bounty that saves the day, it's George who has a chat with the whale probe and everyone is saved. Up. And then we just get a fun scene of frolicking in the water. Taken up. The final 5 or 6 minutes of this film, you have a lot of things happen in rapid succession. The trial of the crew in front of the Federation president it's quite heartwarming, it's quite uplifting, but I think it's very important they left the demotion in. Because if you think about it, up to this time, the crew of the Enterprise could pretty much do whatever they wanted. They're not always breaking the rules, but often. As would be explored in a later film, the conduct of the crew falls upon its commander, and that is Admiral Kirk. As an admiral, Kirk can't be seen to be just running around willy-nilly doing whatever he wants and flouting authority. So he is reduced in rank to captain. Now, in a way, we know that this is the best thing for him. What's Kirk good at? Captaining a starship. So it's both facing the music while having a happy ending. And it really, really works. I love that they list off the things that they do, because in fairness, destruction of property, Enterprise, sabotage of property, USS Excelsior, assault on Starfleet personnel. I mean, there's a few charges there, and they're not light. But disobeying a direct order from a superior officer, which, if we think back to Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, it's, Admiral Morrow orders Kirk not to go to Genesis. Kirk goes anyway. You gotta face the music. But Captain Kirk doesn't look that upset. As the council all applauds, because they know it's not exactly a punishment either, we get Kirk saying goodbye to Gillian, and again, Catherine Hicks just is fantastic in the role, as he jokes, well, as they say in your century, I don't even have a telephone number. And she says, I'll find you. See you around the galaxy. Taken up. Wish we'd seen her again, loved her in this film. We get a crucial scene then between Spock and Sarek. Sarek tells Spock that he's about to take his leave for Vulcan. Do you have any message for me to pass on to your mother? As Spock says, yes. Tell her I feel fine. Beautiful, live long and prosper, and thus ends the final on-screen interaction between Leonard Nimoy's Spock and Mark Lenard's Sarek. Because while both were in Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, and though Sarek was at Kittimer at the end, they don't interact. And then the film ends and there's nothing important there, and let's get to the Temple observations, shall we? So they're in a shuttle, and they're flying through space dock, and McCoy says, the bureaucratic mentality is the only constant in the galaxy. We'll get a freighter. Actually, Doctor, I'm counting on Excelsior. Taken up for so many historical reasons, but also, love the way Sulu says Excelsior. Excelsior! What would you want that bucket of bolts for? Scotty, I haven't forgotten you. And it looks for a second like they might get it. But then, the shuttle lifts up over the saucer section of the Excelsior, and we see the newly christened Enterprise A. This scene moves me every single time. It soars, it lifts me. I never, ever am unhappy while watching this. Let's see what she's got. Up. We've come home at last. Now, would you care to join me at Temporal Observations? Right, time warp that was introduced in this film. Well, it actually wasn't introduced in this film because it was seen in the original series episode Assignment Earth, back when Gene Roddenberry was looking for a rather flimsy excuse to get the Enterprise back so that they could meet Gary 7. The exact form of time warp would be seen again in Star Trek Picard's second season, when they completely name drop Kirk and crew doing it from this film. The Enterprise A makes its debut in this film, and it is, of course, it's a reuse of the filming model of the original Enterprise, but it's just gorgeous. I've always loved that addition of the A at the end of the registry. The bridge set is the bridge set from earlier on, but it's much more highly lit because it also includes graphics from a certain young Mr. Michael Okuda. Yes, Mike Okuda, the designer and creator of the famous L-Cars, makes his debut with Star Trek in this film, as I should say, in working on Star Trek in this film, because, was an extra on the motion picture. So it's not his debut, but his designs make a debut here. Sulu references the USS Excelsior. Well, as we know from our previous Ups and Downs, Sulu was earmarked to become commander of the Excelsior back in the Wrath of Khan. He would of course go on to become commander of the Excelsior in the Undiscovered Country, which we would see again in the Voyager episode Flashback. Kirk Thatcher, who appears as the punk on the bus, it's just so much fun, was working behind the scenes on Star Trek The Voyage Home and earlier films as well. But he would appear as this character once again in Star Trek Picard's second season, the episode Watcher. Well, clearly he remembers something about playing music on a bus, enough to turn off his boombox that time. Saavik, as we have mentioned already. So Saavik makes her last appearance, here in Star Trek until a named shuttle in Star Trek Picard's third season. But Robin Curtis did eventually return to the role, not in Star Trek main, if you will. 765874 Unification, the short film by Otoy, brought Robin Curtis back to the role of Saavik, but she was joined by Sorak. This is the child that she is said to have conceived while helping Spock with his Pon farr in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. This was explained in the novel Vulcan's Heart. She would go on to raise this child, who would appear in Unification as well. All of this, of course, not said on screen in this film, although it was in the script that she was pregnant. Kirk, in fact, asked when would Spock be made aware of this. The Vulcan testing that we see Spock undergoing would come back again in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek 2009 with those little testing pods. The message to avoid Earth at all costs, well, as wonderful as that is, it would be reused again, or, well, it would be paid homage to, if you like, in the Star Trek Picard final episode, The Last Generation. Here, Walter Koenig would play Anton Chekhov, Chekhov's son, in this film, where he issued the warning to stay away from Earth as the Borg were taking over. This was a somewhat last-minute addition to the episode that was... listen, I made swear words when that happened. That was fun. The glasses that Kirk pawns off, they were first given to him in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan by Dr. McCoy, and they were broken in the battle with Khan, which is why he doesn't get more for them in this film. Although George and Gracie themselves don't appear again in Star Trek, there's a suggestion that their granddaughter does. Gillian is the name of the whale that helps to pilot the USS Voyager A in cetacean operations in Star Trek Prodigy's second season. There's even a suggestion that she used a little bit of nepotism to get through Starfleet Academy. I'm just saying. The whole story of the Yorktown, that comes from Gene Roddenberry himself. So the Yorktown, of course, being the original name for the Enterprise in the Bible Star Trek is, and that name has never really gone away. You know, obviously we saw it in Star Trek Beyond as the Yorktown Space Station, but here it's where this dark idea that the entire crew of the Yorktown died because they suffocated, which is, I don't really like it because it makes the legacy of the Enterprise A kind of starting off for me a coffin ship. I will say, if you say, look, that's nonsense because it's not said on screen, I'm okay with that. Please don't get me wrong. I don't really want the legacy of the Enterprise A to be, oh yeah, they had to fish out all the dead bodies. I remember reading an interview with Vijay Amritraj, who played Captain Joel Randolph. Now, he was a tennis star. He was not an actor per se. He had a couple of credits, but he said that his character died in this film. So I don't know who to believe. According to him, he's dead, so I guess we should believe people? I'm going to also take this opportunity to make a tiny amendment to our list on, which is 20 things you didn't know about Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. I made a tiny little whoopsie. Jane Weedland, who was the rhythm guitarist and backing vocals, not the lead singer, as I said in the 20 things you didn't know about Star Trek: The Voyage Home, of the band The Go-Go's. She appears on the screen as Trelia, who is a humanoid alien female who is reporting in about, being affected by the cetacean probe. So, updated. The HMS Bounty, obviously you've got the historical thing of, it's the Bounty, the mutiny on the Bounty. The ship itself, of course, being a reuse of the ship from Star Trek: The Search for Spock with a new bridge. There's a joke somewhere along the way. It's like, oh, the bridge was just somewhere else on the ship because it's a complete redesign. And it's the redesign that would sort of form it's sort of like a hybrid of this and the one from the motion picture would become like the template for Klingon ships going forward in the future. Also, the Bounty itself was a time machine, and it once belonged to Christopher Lloyd. Christopher Lloyd, time machines. Where have I heard that one before? The Bounty crashes into San Francisco Bay, and up until very recently, that was the last we ever heard of it. But no, they did fish it out. They had trouble finding it because the cloaking device activated, but they then moved it to the Starfleet Fleet Museum orbiting 8th and Prime. That cloaking device becomes very important in the back half of Star Trek Picard's 3rd season. John Shook, who appears as the Klingon ambassador here, would return in Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, and would also appear as a Cardassian legate in Star Trek Deep Space Nine in the episode The Maquis. Just his command is brilliant. He would also appear again in Star Trek Enterprise as a Klingon scientist who is more or less directly responsible for the smooth foreheads. Wibbly wobbly. Jane Wyatt making her final Star Trek appearance in this film. We have a scene that was scripted but never filmed. Occurred just outside the Pacific Bell Yellow Pages thing, where Sulu would bump into a young child who he would discover was Akira Sulu, his own great-grandfather. The reason it was never filmed is everything was set up, everything was ready to go, but on the day, the child, who was a little boy, was not a professional actor, as you can imagine, and his mother was on set, and he was very nervous, and they couldn't get the delivery from him. So in the end, they scrapped the scene. And apparently George Takei was really upset about this. The scene is reinserted into the novelization. Speaking of, Vonda N. McIntyre wrote her final work for Star Trek tie-in with Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. Probably the biggest inclusion really is that scene of Sulu's ancestor. Speaking of writing, we often think, when we think of Nicholas Meyer, we often think of Star Trek II and Star Trek VI, but he was also part of the he wrote part of the screenplay for this film. Perhaps one of the reasons I like it as much as I do. There is a version of this film that never made it past, it never even, I don't think it got to scripting, that would have seen Eddie Murphy, who was at that point at the height of his fame, playing a wacky college professor who was also a UFO nut. So the story goes that Murphy approached Paramount with an idea saying, I would like to be a part of Star Trek. And so when Nimoy was looking at the scripts, he could see that the earliest versions of this script were clearly written with Eddie Murphy in mind. Eddie Murphy chose to make The Golden Child instead. This was not his best decision, as he would himself say in the years that followed. I can lament the film that never was, while also not being that sad because he eventually left the project, we got Gillian Taylor instead. I consider that a good win. In the nuclear vessels scene, there is a passerby who clearly stops to speak to Uhura and Chekhov, and her name was Leila Sarukalu. The story goes that she was not meant to be in the film at all. She was not an actor, nor was she an extra, nor was she registered with any kind of union. She simply wasn't able to move her car. There was a sign put up that because they were filming in the area, traffic was going to stop for a while, no one would be able to leave. And rather than get annoyed about this, she went up and said, oh look, I won't kick up as long as you put me in the film. And so she was meant to just be passing by, but she stopped to answer Chekhov. All of that was just off the cuff. And so because she spoke and they found it so funny they wanted to leave it in the film, oh, I don't think I know the answer to that. Try across the bay, in Alameda. In Alameda, that's what I said. It said in Alameda. They wanted to leave it in the film, which meant she had to be inducted into the Screen Actors Guild, all because she couldn't move her car. Brilliant. Love it. There's a couple of product placements, if you like, in this film. Some which don't date the film. For example, Michelob is very much a beer that is still available today. The Apple Computer Company. They made the Macintosh computer that Scotty was using. Hello, computer. And they used a keyboard. How quaint. I don't think they haven't really done much since Apple Computer Company. No, never heard of them after this. Pacific Bell. I can feel the hand of time. The great scene where Kirk says, no, I'm from Iowa, I just work in outer space. Obviously, when Star Trek 2009 appeared, and because of Nero's machinations, Kirk was born on a shuttle off the Kelvin. But if you think about it, the Kelvin was, unless Kirk's mom was planning on going to suspended animation on that ship and getting back to Iowa before giving birth, Nero didn't have anything to do with Kirk being born in space. Roberto Orsi, who sadly recently passed away, joked that he never specifically said he was born in Iowa, he said he was from Iowa. And it's just vague enough that it works. There is a scene at the end of this film where the TOS crew stand ready to deal with their charges. And you have Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Uhura, Sulu, Scotty, Chekhov, right? You also have Chapel and Rand are present at that scene as well. It's the only time in all of Star Trek that all of those characters, as played by the characters who originated them, appear in the same scene together. It's the only time. Fitting then that it would be the last time that Majel Barrett would play Commander Christine Chapel on screen. The USS Saratoga that loses power at the beginning of this film, it would be recovered and then it would be refit to look like the Saratoga that was lost at Wolf 359 and then displayed at the Starfleet Fleet Museum. Not gonna lie, that's a flipping tenuous connection. Dave Blass explained that on Twitter that yes, it was the Saratoga from this film that was reclaimed, but it was given a refit to look like the one that was lost. Sure, why not? Anyway, technically this ship is on show at the Fleet Museum at 8th and Prime. I just want to speak out really quickly in defense of the Finnish audience who are watching this film, because the people on the whaling ship are speaking Finnish. Finland doesn't have a history of whaling. Just want to throw that out there. And last but least, Ronald Reagan liked the film. Yippee. And there you have it. Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, or Star Trek IV: The One with the Whales, was released in 1986 and was for a long time the highest grossing Star Trek film in the franchise until it was surpassed by Star Trek 2009. It was so successful, in fact, that it inspired Paramount to take a punt on a little TV show that would come to be known as Star Trek: The Next Generation. Speaking of next week we will be covering Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. I cannot wait to go through this film, I won't lie to you. Thank you so much for following us along this week. Yous are wonderful and yous are awesome. Please hit subscribe, please share this video, and please talk about this on socials, send us messages at us. I love talking about this stuff with you. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who's watching these videos, who is coming up to us when they see us and talking to us about it. Like, it really warms the heart, I won't lie. Folks, you're wonderful, you're brilliant. We'll be back to you very soon. Thanks very much. An alien, ooh.